Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. What happens when a prophet makes a quick judgment without hearing both sides? We'll be discussing the story of David as part of our Misunderstood Quranic Verses series. It's from chapter 38, verse 21 to 26. It's a long passage. With me is Dr. Shabir. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Tell us about these verses, Dr. Shabir. Maybe you can begin by laying out the scene, telling us a little bit about the story of David, and then we can look at the verses in particular.
Yeah, so in Surah 38, known as Surah Sad, starting with verse number 21, we have this unusual occurrence where two disputants apparently scale the wall and enter into David's prayer area. King David, according to the Bible, Dawud alayhi salam, the prophet of God, according to the Quran. And they bring up their dispute to him. He's surprised to begin with, but they're asking him, okay, we have this dispute, please, render a judgment that is fair to us. And then one of them naturally puts forward his case. We can call him the plaintiff. The plaintiff then, is asking, okay, so I have this brother of mine, and he has 99 lambs, and I have just the one ewe, and he is asking me for the one, and he is overpowering me in his disputation. So render a judgment, and then David renders the judgment. He says, certainly he is oppressing you by demanding your ewe to be added to his flock. And there are many such who, in partnership with others, they overstep the boundaries, and they in a way rob the other one. And then he realized that he was being tested by God, and that's when he sought God's forgiveness. And the Quran says, that he even bowed down in humility before God. So this becomes one of the verses which, when we recite in Arabic, many scholars believe that this makes it necessary for us to perform what is called a sajda tilawa, or a prostration of following a recitation of this and some other verses of the Quran, 15 altogether.
So where is the part about him realizing? I'm trying to look at these verses and see. Oh, then David realized that we had tested him.
26,
so he asked for his Lord's forgiveness. Yes, so it's from 24. Yes,
Yeah.
Interesting. So it says, I'll start from 23. It says, "This is my brother. He has 99 sheep, while I have only one. Still, he asked me to give it up to him, overwhelming me with his argument." And then 38:24, David eventually ruled, "He has definitely wronged you in demanding to add your sheep to his. And certainly many partners wrong each other, except those who believe and do good. But how few are they?" Then David realized that we had tested him. So he asked for his Lord's forgiveness, fell down in prostration, and turned to him in repentance. Interesting. So what's misunderstood about these verses, Dr. Shabir?
Yeah, so let me start with the word eventually, which you read in the translation.
This is the Mustafa Khattab translation.
Yeah. Translation, yeah. So he put eventually in brackets because he is thinking that, okay, some other things may have transpired, and then eventually David gives the judgment. But the Quranic narrative is very brisk. It's like the plaintiff puts his case forward, and then it looks like right away David rendered his judgment, saying that the other person is definitely wrong. So some of the classical Muslim commentators on this, just looking at the Quranic narrative as it is, thought that David rendered too rash a judgment. He should have asked the plaintiff for evidence, like, what's your evidence that this other person took your ewe? Or you said he's demanding it, or he's requesting it. So where is, what's the request? Where's the proof that you have any witnesses, for example? And then he should turn to the defendant and ask the defendant, okay, what do you say about this complaint against you? But the Quranic narrative is bare of all of that. So that leaves it possible for a Muslim to interpret the Quran by saying that the fault of David here is that he was too rash in his judgment. And then given our conception of prophets as persons who are the most excellent exemplars of morality and ethics in their time, we don't expect him to have done anything that's a grave wrong. So one might even excuse it by saying, it happens to the best of us that somebody comes forward and they put forward a nice case and we believe them because, when believers tend to be soft, we are humble before God and we start to become humble before other people as well, and we should be. But the humility can be overdone, especially in the face of other people. And some people can misuse that. They can play on our soft spots and come in with a sob story, and they can move us. And it happens to people all of the time. Imams in mosques, one person comes in and makes a claim against another person, and then the imam takes a side with the person who makes the complaint without hearing the rest of the story, because how could this person in the mosque be telling a lie, right? So we believe that person.
It happens in all sorts of situations. Like someone will come and tell you something about, I don't know, their spouse or like their workplace or anything, right? Their neighbor, and you'll believe it, right? You just automatically believe it, and you'll think badly of the other person without necessarily hearing the other person's side or even seeking it out.
That's right. That's right. That's why we need to clarify things before we even open our mouth, because we can badmouth another person and then regret it later on when we find out the truth of the matter. So David actually was in an enviable position in that, or maybe unenviable position, in that he was being trained to be like the ruler of his people. So he would have judgments, cases brought before him. And this is mentioned in the verses that follow up until verse number 26 in this chapter, that God is not going to appoint him as judge and ruler of his people. So he will have to decide cases. So now it is natural that he's being trained. He's being shown the ways in which a judgment can go wrong and how to make sure that it doesn't. So this also lent itself for Muslim commentators to think that the two disputants were actually not humans in essence, but they were angels in human disguise, sent by God to give David this lesson. So all of that makes sense from the Quranic narrative standpoint, and it fits within Islamic theology, especially our prophetology. In the Bible, a different sort of story is mentioned, and of course there are overlaps, and so the commentators naturally gravitated towards the biblical story as an explanation for the Quranic one. But the biblical story goes into details that have disturbed many of the commentators themselves. It starts off in 2 Samuel chapter 11 with the first verse. David, being king, he's strolling on his rooftop, breezing out in the evening, and or at whatever time, and he notices that this lady, Bathsheba by name, is taking a bath. He's attracted to her. He sends his servants to bring her into his palace. He sleeps with her, sends her back home. Eventually, she messages him to let him know that she's become pregnant from that encounter. And now, what is he to do? Because the secret will become exposed and his sin will become public. So the woman's husband, Uriah, was at this time in battle, sent off by David in one of his troops. And David sent for him, recalled him on the hope that he will come home, go home and sleep with his wife. And then, when later on her pregnancy is discovered, it will be presumed that this man Uriah is the father of the child. But Uriah, faithful as he is to his assignment, he refused to go home. He said, "I cannot when my comrades are there in the heat of battle." So David, acceding to his request to go back into the battlefield, does actually send him, but sends a secret note to the general to have this man placed in a contingent that will face the fiercest odds, and let a part of the contingent fall back so as to leave this man together with the others in the lurch. And of course, he was killed, and the others along with him through this ploy. And then David married the man's wife, Bathsheba, after, according to the Bible, she had passed her period of purity. Or impurity. She has now become pure for a new husband. And, that seems to be the end of the story, except that in the following chapter, chapter 12, Nathan, a prophet, is sent by God to go and talk to David and to, convict him of his sin. David is repentant, But nonetheless, he's given some reprimands, and as part of the reprimand, he's told that the child is going to die. And so this child, God afflicts with an illness, and the child dies in infancy after several months of illness. And eventually Bathsheba gives birth to another child for David, who becomes the famous King Solomon, or the prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. Now, in recounting this story, the Muslim commentators avoid the part where he commits adultery. So they just have it that, okay, you know how the Quran says that this man said to David that my brother is asking me for my ewe, and he is overpowering me in disputation. So it looks like to the Muslim commentators, the story only indicates that one person was making a request, not that he actually took the other person's lamb. So they said, okay, well, in this case, we can home in on the story from the point where David, let's say he has a desire for this woman, but he doesn't actually take her. He just makes a request to the other person. And it is possible, they say, maybe in those days, that a man could make a request to another man, look, can you divorce your wife so that she can be ready for me to marry her? And that would have been considered normal at the time. But they say, okay, what would be Dawood's or David's sin in this? They say, well, it's not generally a sin, but in his position, he should have known that a request between two men would have been fine, but between king and subject, it's not fine because it's not really a request. Once it comes from the king, the subject will not have much of an option, and so it becomes an unreasonable demand, and so it's uncouth for him to be making such an unreasonable demand, and hence he was being corrected. But you can see here the interplay between, on the one hand, the reliance on the biblical narrative, and on the other hand, the hesitation to accept some of the most objectionable parts from a Muslim point of view, the most objectionable parts of the story. But of course, the rest of the story.
Do the verses actually say sheep in the actual Arabic?
Yes, naja in Arabic. So this man says to David, "Inna hadha akhi lahu tis'un wa tis'una naja." This is my brother. He has 99 sheep. Wali najatun wahida. And I have just the one, you. So, and then he is asking me for the one, and fa'azani fil khitab, wa'azani fil khitab, and he's overpowering me in speech. So that's how the Quranic narrative is.
So it seems like the classical commentators are trying to bridge the divide between the Bible and the Quran, trying to find a way to align them. Right?
Yes.
But aligning them in an incorrect way.
Yes, of course. And it's incorrect because, as Ibn Kathir pointed out later in his tafsir, this story is not with any solid basis from an Islamic point of view. People who knew the biblical material were relating it, and it found its way into the books of commentaries on the Quran. But from Ibn Kathir's standpoint, no, this is a mursal tradition. It is not an attested one, and we cannot. I mean, it does not have like an unbroken link all the way to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we cannot accept this as an Islamic narrative. And Ar-Razi, before Ibn Kathir, actually took the narrative, deconstructed it bit by bit to show that even if you start where the Muslim commentators started, avoiding the part about the adultery, you still have the plot to get this man killed in the battlefield. And how could we imagine that a prophet of God, Dawood alayhi salam, would be a party to such a scheme? So he did not accept any part of that story. And the most natural reading of the Quranic text is to say, well, the Quran, while being aware of the biblical story, is including some elements that may remind people that, we're dealing with that story, but at the same time, the Quran has highly sanitized it of the portions which, from the Quranic perspective, would be objectionable as a story about one of the great prophets of God.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu
alaikum.
Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.